Welcome to Voice of the Customer, Best Practices for B2B Companies, presented by Strategex. I'm your moderator, Maggie Graham. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Strategex and our hosts. A few housekeeping things before we get started. If you have questions or comments during the webinar, please use the Q&A or chat button at the bottom of your screen. We have reserved time at the end of this webinar for Q&A. Also, a recording of the webinar will be available on our website later this week. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Strategex and our hosts. Strategex is a research and consulting firm based in Chicago, Illinois. Strategex is dedicated to providing direction and support for sustainable, profitable, and aggressive growth. We offer voice of the customer consulting, customer due diligence, and 80/20 growth consulting. Exclusively dedicated to B2B clients, we have been providing research-based consulting services since 1993. Since then, we've conducted over 600 projects across more than 50 industries. And we practice what we preach. Our world-class Net Promoter Score of 80+ is the reason that over 75% of our revenue comes from repeat clients. Our hosts are Tom Taber and Kay Cruse. Tom Taber is Managing Director and VOC Practice Leader at Strategex. During his 15+ years with Strategex, Tom has consulted with more than 200 mid-tier to Fortune 500 corporations across 4 continents. He focuses on developing growth strategies to improve customer relationships, uncovering opportunities for new product and service innovations, and leading mergers and acquisitions, customer due diligence efforts. Tom received a BA in economics from Tufts University and holds an MBA from Northwestern University, Kellogg School of Business. Kay Cruse is a seasoned veteran of customer research, strategic planning, and brand development. With over 25 years of experience, Kay Cruse serves as Vice President of the Voice of the Customer strategic practice at Strategex. Kay specializes in customer experience insights, prioritizing strategic opportunities, and tactical implementation. She leads Strategex's engagements in customer due diligence, where she employs voice of the customer techniques to mitigate risk and to develop strategic post-close roadmaps. Kay leverages her extensive history in the manufacturing, business, and financial services and private equity industries. So, without further ado, I will turn it over to Tom and Kay.
Thank you, Maggie, and greetings, everyone. We're speaking to you from Chicago. So our intent in the next 45 minutes to an hour is to share what we know to help you improve, either create and or improve your Voice of the Customer program. As Maggie mentioned, we've done these surveys for many, many years and come across both best practices and not so good practices. But I think through it all, we've uncovered quite a bit to share, and that's our intent. We're hoping to give perspective on not just the design of these studies so they're effective, how to execute them, and most importantly, how to follow up and get the most, kind of the best ROI from it. And along the way, we'll share some case studies, some of the better and not so better. I think you'll find that all informative and helpful as we go along. If you're like me, I suspect in any given day, you probably get at least one request for a survey. I just came back from California, and I think in a course of 36 hours, I got a request from my airline, my rent-a-car, my hotel, and I think even one of the restaurants I ate at. Well, needless to say, there's a bit of survey fatigue out there. It's become almost too popular for its own good. And now, as a result of that, I think that the value and the effect of these surveys is going to go down quite a bit. The challenge, though, for B2B companies is that we got to get feedback. You have no choice. Think of successful businesses you know out there. They're not successful just by random chance. They collected feedback along the way, tuned and improved their business. Whether they did it informally or formally, it's some method to capture feedback. And as we all know, and any business has this kind of this evolutionary track, which is with its customers, it always starts out establishing relationships, And then our goal is to build loyalty and evolve a partnership and even create raving fans. But as mentioned, this doesn't happen. More often than not, often the opposite can happen. You have red flags that come up with your business relationships. There's loss of an account. You as a supplier are not invited to participate in a new development opportunity. You get the rumblings that a competitor is taking share from you, get a better position. Now, all of a sudden, the need to capture feedback of what's going on shifts from a nice to have to a must to have. There's real concern there. So when we speak of voice of the customer, let me just level set just real quickly. What I referred to earlier about all those surveys with your airline and your rent-a-car at your hotel, I speak of those as transactional surveys. Those are the surveys that are sent out randomly after an event occurs. And as mentioned, as you know, as a consumer, they typically get pretty low response rates. And for those that do fill it out, they're simply checking boxes and scoring the company with very, very little insight. What we're talking about, something extremely different, is doing what we call a relationship survey. And this is a survey that's planned in advance with a comprehensive set of questions. It's conducted on an agreed cadence. It might be once a year, once every 18 months, even maybe 2 years. It's thoughtfully designed so it focuses on the accounts that matter. And often it's used some form of an interviewing method, whether it's phone or in person, etc. And the result of that is that typically you get a much higher response rate. But I'll let Kay speak to that element in just a second. The last aspect of these relationship surveys, and what makes them very, very different than a transactional survey, is that it's a combination of qualitative and quantitative. So a good one executed should capture scores and ratings, but also gives you the insights behind it so you know what to improve and what to work on. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kay, my colleague, and let her walk you through a number of the key elements that make up VOC best practice to design.
Thank you, Tom. As we work our way forward, oftentimes we're asked, well, what about a web survey? Can't we just do a web survey? Well, we find that a web survey these days, years ago, we used to love to take them. Now we're in a range of about 4%, sometimes 6%. This is the average response rate. So you have to have a tremendous pool of web respondents in order to capture any kind of meaningful data. When we're dealing with a phone interview, in essence, we're getting anywhere from 70 to 80% participation rate. So again, you can see the difference between if you had 4% of a story versus 80% of a story, you can understand what's going on. Harvard Today, management tip of the day, Tom, you may have seen it, encourages companies to interview, not survey, because they find, as we have found, that you'll get far more meaningful information, far more insights into what's going on in the customer's mind as he or she wants to deal with your company itself. So what are those insights? Obviously, one of the things that we want to find out is, as Tom mentioned, that we capture scores for data, but we often find that we need to have the insights to drive what's going on. So who are we going to interview? Certainly we want to interview the top accounts. What are their biggest concerns? How do you compare versus your competing suppliers? That's a topic that very frequently a customer won't want to talk to you about, because in essence, they don't really want to share the competitive information that they are starting to explore. We can, in essence, find out, where do you need to improve? What does the competitor do that you should be emulating? Are there things that they do from a best practice standpoint that would be more meaningful to customers, which are often shared because of the supply chain protection issues that are out and about in the business-to-business world? In many cases, you will never have 100% share. But one of the things that we also need to find out from this respondent base is, how satisfied are you with the level of service and support that you provide? These become the nuances. Again, it's a topic that's sensitive, that they oftentimes will not be willing to share in a non-protected environment. So how do you maximize the participation? We want to talk about, certainly, the fact that we're going to do it. We want to make sure that management, as high in the organization as possible can talk about the need and the importance of doing this. More personal contact from the sales rep to encourage participation. Again, stressing that candid, open feedback is required and is needed in order for us to move forward. We typically will ask as a best practice 5 or more requests over the course of about a 2-week period. Contacts that are in a variety of both emails as well as phone contacts, to let them schedule an interview at their convenience with the interviewee. Commit to sharing the feedback. Obviously, we will often hear, well, what's going to happen with this information? What are you going to do with it? Well, importantly, we're going to learn what it is we need to do to satisfy the customer more so. And importantly, we want to try to take into consideration what else do we need to be doing, whether it's satisfaction and loyalty, whether it's new products, which ones are more valuable than others, but looking at, again, what's the best course of action to take from this feedback. Timing, when do you do it? Well, if you're in the bakery business, you don't do it during Thanksgiving and Christmas. If you're in the business of shipbuilding, you're not going to do it right up before the season of ship selling. So again, look at what the logical time is for your particular customer. Where are they going to have enough space and bandwidth to be able to share some time with you in advance? So who do you interview? Well, we call it the 80-20. This is basically a playbook out of our 80-20 practice, and we want to say the top customers, in essence, we say 80% of your revenues are driven by 20% of your customers. In reality, we find that it's actually more than that. The top 25% of your customers are actually probably contributing as much as 89% of your revenue. So again, we want to focus on top accounts. We also want to focus on accounts that are what we call underperforming. Those accounts that you say, man, we ought to have more business from them, but for some reason we don't seem to be able to get more. What's going on? What do we need to be doing? So again, the 80-20 rule drives many of our engagements to say, who should we be talking to? Let's look at the data. Let's look at your data for sales and data for products lines to understand who we should be speaking with. Who do you interview? Obviously the main contact, but what about other functions? Because like the elephant in the room, that the blind man is touching, many people are touching your company at different places. So certainly we want to look at R&D, if you have an R&D function. We want to look at technical service and technical support if you have a highly technical integration plan that has to occur with your customers' manufacturing. So we want to look beyond the main contact. We also want to look beyond the day-to-day contact to look at who is the influencer, who's a key decision maker. One of Tom's previous screens mentioned that oftentimes a red flag is there's a change at the top. So one of the things that we want to try to find out is what is the top thinking? What are the phrases that are heard throughout the organization about your company? Because in essence, no one talks, no one keeps everything to themselves. We find that word of mouth within a company is just as valuable as the relationship that you have with them. One of the things that we often say is think about if you had an advisory board, who would you like to be sitting on that board? Who would you like to be having sitting across from you, telling you the very straight and narrow, this is what's going on and this is what I need you to do. So who should conduct the interviews? Well, you can do it in-house or you can do it with a third party. Obviously, we think third party has some advantages. Certainly it's objective, it's neutral. We find frequently, in many cases, where we'll talk to clients about whether they should be doing internally or externally, oftentimes we will hear, particularly the salespeople or the account managers or the client relationship managers say, there isn't anything that they're going to tell you that I haven't heard 100 times myself. And invariably, when we bring back information from the accounts, somebody will raise their hand and say, they've never, ever said that to me. So what happens is respondents tend to be more open. If they're speaking with a professional researcher, that researcher has the ability to probe a little more introspectively. He or she can go down a rabbit hole with the client to try to understand what's really behind their thinking. So again, looking at a way to capture that verbatim feedback is very important as we look at what's going on in the interview process itself. Professional researchers also have the ability to take very detailed notes. And those notes construct, obviously, a good direction for where we should be going. Frequently, we find that when you're doing it in-house, the agenda gets a little twisted. I want to hear these kinds of things, therefore that's what I'm listening for. If you have a third party, that person doesn't come in with a preset mindset of what do I really want to hear versus what are they really going to say. So what do you ask? The Net Promoter Score, obviously Tom referenced it very early on. It's getting a little tired, a little tiresome to have so many surveys thrown at you. But what we are finding that in the business-to-business world, it still has good value. For instance, Wall Street just did a pretty deep dive into earnings call transcripts. And in 2005, there were only 5 mentions of Net Promoter Scores. Of course, this is, again, an assessment of loyalty. In 2018, roughly 13 years later, there were 155 mentions of Net Promoter Score in those earning calls. So clearly it has gained a lot of momentum, a lot of interest from Wall Street. Why? Mainly because somebody that has a high Net Promoter Score itself, generally speaking, is delivering more than just a product or a commodity. They are delivering a relationship. They're making the job easier to do business. You make my job easier when you have a high Net Promoter Score. Therefore, I don't have to worry about it. So, Net Promoter Score, how do you calculate it? Take the percent of 9s and 10s. You subtract everybody that's a percentage that gives you 6 and below. And that becomes, obviously, promoters minus detractors. That becomes your score. The score itself can be anything from a minus 100%, yikes, all the way up to a plus 100%, which I don't think we have ever had anyone conduct an NPS that would enable them to achieve 100%. The 7s and 8s, those are what we call the passives. And everybody will say, well, wait a minute, 8's a good score. Well, yes and no. It's a good score because obviously they feel they have a good relationship with you. But at the same point in time, they're not absolutely 100% loyal. They may say, got a new project. I'll put you in, but I also want to see what your competition's going to do at the same time. So Net Promoter Scoring companies, high ones. Why is Wall Street interested? They tend to outpace the market in growth from basically 2 to 3 times growth rate. It also is a predictor of the business's future growth rate. And importantly, as I mentioned, more times than not, a high promoter scoring company will have a premium price value. Why? They're paying you for more than just a commodity. They're paying you to make their life easier. So again, we look at promoters and we look at the passives. We don't count the passives, but we say, what do we need to do to turn those passive people into raving fans, into promoters? How can we help them become as interested and as engaged and as satisfied with us as our promoters are? We want to go beyond the Net Promoter Score, though. And again, this is where a lot of businesses are starting to fail. This is why Harvard puts out interview, don't survey. You have to develop a dialogue. We have to understand strengths, areas of improvement. We need to understand the important question, why did you give them that kind of score? And we want to look at how the company compares competitively, how they perform against a variety of criteria that become important to know. And we want to look at probably anywhere about a 25 to 30-minute interview. That is, again, because you're scheduling an interview, because you've asked for this time, because you've made an appeal that this is very valuable not only for the company, your company, but importantly for your client. We find that most often, 75 to 80% of the time, people can carve out about 30 minutes worth of time. We want to go beyond a health check, though. A health check obviously tells you how well is the business performing. But importantly, we want to try to understand what else is going on. How well do you support innovation? How well do you align with where their future needs are? How much of a partner are you in the relationship? So as we look at, again, this looking for a superior customer experience, this is Maslow's hierarchy. And the foundation says, okay, you got to start with, I have to believe you, I have to trust you, and I have to think you're an honest company to work with. Pretty basic. Then the next step on that rung is obviously to supply what's expected. I expect you to deliver on time. I expect you to deliver good quality. I expect you to be competitively priced. But as we move up, we start to go into a slightly different relationship. We want to look at, how do you provide great service? Are you responsive? Are you attentive? Are you easy to work with? Do you resolve problems well? We know every single business at some point in time is going to run into a problem. The question is, how well do you handle it? We've had customers, interviewees say to us about clients, I will be a customer for life because of the way they handled the recall. Now, a recall is a pretty serious event, but having somebody say, I will be a customer for life because of the way they handled it, exactly hits the point on providing great service. But importantly, when you get to the top of that scale, it's a win-win. How do you help the customer win? How do you set up new innovations? How do you align with their speed to market? How well do they say, I can count on this company because I know I can win in my marketplace because of the way they support me? So, support me. What are you going to look at? You're going to look at service. You're going to look at the primary contact information. Remember, I talked about, if you're doing this internally, oftentimes an account of yours won't necessarily want to say to a salesperson, you know, I hate it that you never return phone calls, that you always hide behind emails. Why don't you just pick up the phone and call me? They're not going to say that to the customer account representative, but they certainly will say that to a third party. Ease of doing business. How easy do you make their jobs? How well do you handle complaints? So we want to try to probe, we want to try to get ratings, we want to try to understand insights into all of those areas that matter absolutely the most. How well do you engage? Engagement often correlates with Net Promoter Scoring. Engagement is proactive. It looks at how to build those relationships. If you go to a favorite restaurant, how much better do you feel when the service representative you have comes up to you and says, hi, Jane, would you like to have your same drink that you ordered last time you were here? Great. That engagement says, you matter to me. We want to try to understand how the company engages, how not just primary contact, but importantly, how everyone within the organization engages, because every contact point within a company at some point in time has something to do with the customer experience. How well they conduct themselves, how well they respond, how well they reply, all of those things become engagement, and that's what becomes most important to us. So Tom,
All right.
how do we get more value?
Thank you, Kay. Reflecting on what she just spoke of, the key takeaway is that a VOC can really be a rich experience. It goes well beyond just getting the fundamentals of quality and delivery and pricing, but to really understand how well we do in service. What we found is that when you're rated well in service, you typically get high NPS scores, and the opposite is true as well. But let's go beyond that. There's certain other areas which a good VOC can dive into, things which might, I wouldn't say be counterintuitive, but you might stop before you want to jump into this, but I'm going to push back on this. Good VOC study can easily capture information in your competition. How well they're perceived. Are they rated above you? Are they preferred? And if so, why? Why not? I often hear that people say, well, that would be sensitive and confidential, and why would they share that with you? But if it's positioned as under the guise of help us better serve you, you can often say, well, who else is doing it that does it better, and what can we learn from them? So I would strongly encourage you to want to incorporate questions about the competition to understand how they're ranked and perceived. One last thing I'd make a point on. While everyone hangs their hat on Net Promoter Score, I'd make an argument the more relevant rating is whether or not you're rated higher or lower than your peer competitor. If your NPS score is 30, 60 or above, if they still prefer the other guy, the NPS isn't worth much. So again, that's why it's key to understand how we do versus competition and where they're valued and preferred. Why? What can we do better? The other area is kind of more forward-looking. As Kay mentioned, the VOC is a big part of this is the health check, a comprehensive health check. How are we serving you today? How are we doing for you? How would you rate us here, rank us there, etc.? But the other aspect of a good VOC can be more, where do we go in the future? What are your needs? new products, new services. How can we better serve you in the future? What are your challenges? By trying to uncover those areas, it helps to align your future account strategies with what is on their mind. And that's a real key part of this, which is it's pivoting from looking in the past to looking in the future and trying to make sure you align with what they're asking you to do. So I'd encourage you to think about as a VOC is being designed, it's not just the ABCs of how we do in this and how we do in that, but also very forward-looking. The one thing you can also do in a VOC, for some of you, if it's of interest, is you can even share the ideas you're thinking about and capture their feedback. You know, undoubtedly, you've got a half a dozen ideas for product, services, or new initiatives. And here's a perfect chance to run it by them and find out who values what, how often they're valued, etc. It will absolutely help you steer your roadmap for developing new and executing new initiatives. All right, so that's up to now the discussion about VOC. Best practices in design, best practices in execution, etc. That's all great until you get the results back, and then you say, what do we do with it all? So let's talk about that for a minute. There's three core things to think about. Number one is taking the insights and the information and using this to stimulate a conversation with your customers about what you're going to do to improve. I've spoken to many random customers that have gone through VOC exercises, and they've told me that at best, 20% of the people that do these surveys, the companies that sponsor these surveys, come back around and thank them and tell them what they're going to do about it. So if you want to differentiate yourself from the pack and do one thing only, at a minimum, just go back and thank them and talk about the feedback. You got to be a little careful. You don't want to quote them verbatim or put them on the spot or challenge what they have to say. But absolutely use it as a way to say, we understood you had certain perspectives on how we do. We're doing well in areas A, B, and C. Great, check the box. But we could improve on being more responsive or better engagement, or our lead times are too long, or the system functionality isn't what it could be, etc. So absolutely use this VOC tool as a way to go back and, what I say, have a state of the union conversation on how well you're serving these accounts. That'd be number one. Number two, and this plays off of what Kay spoke of, which is about asking about how well you engage. If the interview is conducted well, and you've talked to the right people with enough kind of thoughtful discussion, you should have all the makings to develop a smarter engagement plan. What's an engagement plan? What it means is, what's our plan to actually approach and speak to the customer, meet with the customer proactively? It's often a coordinated effort between the account manager and others in the organization. It could be somebody from customer service, somebody from operations, product, technology, who knows? But if the interviews are done well, you should get a sense for how they'd like to meet with you, what they'd like to be working on and talking about. And so encourage to look at all that feedback and convert it into, okay, we should meet with customer A at minimum 4 times a year, plus we should have maybe one top-to-top meeting, maybe 2. And these are the areas that they value most, not just about looking at scorecards, but also looking at 2 or 3 key initiatives and updates. So in other words, not just key thing is just one conversation, but making sure you have a follow-up dialogue and engagement. Second element, or hopefully step 3 really, is going beyond just an engagement plan and converting their insights into where to focus into your key initiatives plan. The customers, if asked in the right way, we should be pretty clear about, I need your help at A, B, and C, or these are my top areas of focus and complaint. And to document those in a prioritized way and use that to basically turn around and say, okay, we're going to, in the next 6 months, 12 months, we're going to work in these half a dozen areas. And my suggestion, my commitment is that we get together every 90 days and confirm we're on the right track and check off these boxes. Promise you customers will be blown away with that level of discipline and follow-up. Because if you think few people go back and circle back and talk about what they heard, even fewer prove they actually worked the issues that were presented to them by the customer. Let me share with you an example of a company that I think has done it well over the years, and also it speaks to many things. This is a client of ours, large company, packaging business. over $1 billion. It's complex. Many, many SKUs produced by several plants, and a leader in the beverage space, both the soda business, beer business, even the water business. We started them back a little after 2010. And the first time we did a voice of the customer study, their NPS score came out at a whopping 9%. Well, as Kay mentioned, talked about the scoring, that is well below average. What this business was known for at the time were the fundamentals: good quality, reliable deliveries, reasonable lead time, and that was about it. They couldn't spell innovation, let alone do it. Their engagement was mediocre at best. Top-to-top management rarely got out in front of customers. And the plants themselves weren't, while they're good at operations, they weren't terribly customer sensitive. They weren't terribly flexible, etc. Fast forward today, this company has evolved and really transformed itself to be kind of the leading player in the industry, with not just retaining the lead in quality and delivery, but now considered almost the most customer-centric. Here's the journey they're on. From a 9% NPS to 35, to 51, and most recently 58. It's quite a transformation. I would say that 58 is in the top tier of packaging companies. And considering this is a very large company that's well over $1 billion, it could almost be considered almost a best-in-class type of score, or absolutely best-in-class improvement. But it didn't just happen randomly. They took the feedback from the Verse VOC, they ate a lot of humble pie, and they then set to work. The VOC feedback gave them the directive on how to create key account teams, and identified where there are weaknesses in the team, where they had to upgrade talent, stressed the importance to management that they had to actually get out there and call on accounts and build relationships. It set the wheels in motion to put a kind of a whole new initiative in place at the plants, for the plants to become more customer first oriented. And lastly, it gave them the confidence to invest some monies, in this case a 7-figure sum, on developing an R&D center. And not just creating an R&D center, but putting the staff in place to really capitalize on that newfound investment. And the impact is pretty significant. As you can see by the words on screen, their top 5 accounts, they've absolutely gained share at all 5 accounts. They're now winning, as of 2-3 years ago, we're winning almost 85% of all the new business contracts that were put out there for themselves versus competition. And while they did that, not only did they gain share, they managed to raise price. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was just enough that it had a material impact on their bottom line. So their EBITDA in about 2.5 years actually doubled. Incredible story. But the key of it was that the customer feedback kind of steered them along the way and what to work on, where to emphasize, etc. It really was a success story. And we've seen this in a number of industries. The key, though, is, again, it's a combination of, what they applied basically some of the best practices we shared, which is number one, be thoughtful in terms of what you ask, thoughtful who you ask to, make sure you're talking to the right people, be patient to get them to really give you the feedback. And then most importantly, bottom line, take action with the results. So we've covered quite a bit. We're going to take a break here, just stop for a moment and look at some questions that have come in. And we'll see if we can answer some of your questions and continue the dialogue.
One of the first questions that's asked is, how many interviews do you need to conduct to be sure you're getting good information? A lot of it depends on the business model. Depends on, as Tom mentioned, there were one instance where there were multiple plants servicing customers. If you have a global footprint, obviously you're going to want to talk to different regions, looking at those types of interviews. You want to have enough interviews to be able to say there's a common thread. There's a consistent story that we're starting to see, both good as well as challenged. So again, depending upon the business model, that could be as few as 20 to 30 to 40. In larger engagements that are more matrix organization, more complex manufacturing setting, Global setting, that could be as much as 150 or so. You want to be sure that when you start cutting the data, that you're not cutting it down to a small sampling of 4, 5, or 6, because then you're going to worry about every single element that's in a transcript or in the report to say, was this really true or not? So that's, again, kind of a good way to look at it.
All right. Another question. Our customers are all over the globe. What are the critical differences between regions that you often see? Well, first of all, let me speak to that on a few levels. Number one, you can absolutely use these types of best practice elements in different regions, whether it's in Europe, Latin America, Asia, even in Russia. We've yet to come across a country or kind of a culture that wouldn't participate in some form of a phone conversation. That's number one. I would tell you that generally speaking, the results, while scores vary a little bit based upon kind of cultural bias in terms of how they score. For example, there's some argument that in some Western European countries, people don't give 9s and 10s. There's an argument that in Latin America, people are a little more loose about their grading. We do see a bit of that, but I'll tell you that in general, more often than not, there's pretty good consistency. And for every time I hear someone say, oh, they don't give 9s and 10s, then we do a VOC study in Europe, and sure enough, the NPS for the client comes back at 58%. So I think the other element to think about is that so long as you're doing thoughtful, probing conversations and you're respectful of their time, and most important, I forgot to mention this, the interviews are done in native language. That's absolutely critical, that they're done respectfully in native language, and not just the interview, but obviously the request for participation, the thank you letter, all the communication done in their language. I think you're going to find good benefit from it. Absolutely. So.
Another question is, we're a very matrixed and complex company. Would this type of study work for us? Well, Tom's example in the case study was pretty much on point with a very matrixed organization. Again, depending upon how, you have to be sure that every engagement that you set up, every VOC that you conduct reflects your business model. And if it is matrixed and it is complex, if you have customers that are served by multiple brands or multiple units, business units within your overarching brand, then by all means, we have to try to understand and pinpoint who is driving the customer perception. Is it a particular business unit or brand? Is it a particular location? Is it a particular factory? So that we can understand where do we need to basically pull the trigger on an action plan to make sure that that occurs consistently.
All right. Any other questions? Please, we'll take a minute and let anybody else type one in. I guess I could take it as if there's no questions, either it's been very, very informative or people are going to sleep. I'm just kidding. But I do hope this has been successful and effective for you. Obviously, of course, any additional inquiries, interests, etc., feel free to be in touch. But again, thank you for your time, and I'll pass it back to Maggie. So.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Kay. And thank you for attending Voice of the Customer, Best Practices for B2B Companies. If you think that you would like to watch this webinar again, or that one of your colleagues or someone on your team might benefit from the content of this webinar, we will send you a link to the recording. And if you have any further questions, please reach out directly to us. You can see Tom and Kay's contact information right on your screen. Connect with them on LinkedIn. They love questions and they love making new connections. You can also, of course, visit us at our website, strategex.com, or email us at info@strategex.com as well. Thank you so much, and we look forward to spending more time with you via webinar or via email or phone call. Thanks.